Most people think a trip starts to go wrong when a flight gets delayed, a bag gets lost, or something goes wrong in the air. But for a lot of travelers, the damage starts much earlier than that. It starts in the airport in moments that feel small enough to ignore. That is what makes these mistakes so dangerous. They do not feel like disasters when they begin. They feel like normal decisions, a normal routine, a normal airport day. And that false sense of control is exactly what catches people off guard. Because once the pressure starts building, small mistakes stop being small. A little lost time turns into stress. Stress turns into rushed decisions. And before long, the whole trip feels harder, more expensive, and more chaotic than it ever needed to be. In 2026, that is still happening to travelers every single day. So in this video, we are going to look at the airport mistakes that quietly create the biggest problems, and why so many people do not realize what is happening until the trip is already starting to slip away. Number 11. Thinking the time on your ticket is the time you need to be there. One of the easiest airport mistakes to make is also one of the most costly. A traveler looks at the time on the boarding pass, builds their whole routine around it, and assumes that is the moment they need to reach the gate. But that time is usually the departure time. It is the time the plane is scheduled to leave the gate, not the time you should still be walking over with a coffee in your hand, checking your phone, or making one last stop. And that misunderstanding creates problems fast. For domestic flights, gate doors often close about 15 to 25 minutes before departure. For international flights, boarding can begin 45 minutes to even an hour earlier. So if your flight says 2 p.m., treating 2 as your true deadline can put you behind before you even realize it. That is why this mistake catches so many people off guard. It does not feel careless. It feels reasonable. But airports do not care how close you were. Once that door closes, it closes. A much safer habit is to treat the departure time as the end of the process, and treat getting settled at the gate well before boarding begins as the real goal. Number 10. Believing the old airport timing rule still works. Another mistake that catches travelers off guard is arriving based on an older airport routine that no longer fits how airports work now. For a long time, people heard the same advice: arrive 2 hours early for a domestic flight and 3 hours early for an international one. And for years, that felt like enough. But in many cases, now it is not. A safer guideline is closer to 2.5 hours for domestic flights and 3.5 hours for international ones. And that extra time is not just there for long security lines. It is there for everything that can suddenly slow you down without warning. A system can glitch. A document check can take longer. A screening point can move far slower than it should. What looks manageable at first can start eating away at your buffer very quickly. And once that buffer disappears, everything changes. You stop moving calmly. You start reacting. You rush. You make poorer decisions. You become more likely to forget something, miss something, or put yourself under pressure you did not need. That is why this mistake matters so much. It is not always that people arrive irresponsibly late. Sometimes they arrive based on a version of airport timing that simply does not protect them anymore. Number 9. Not finding your gate before you do anything else. A lot of travelers make it through security and immediately relax. They assume the hard part is over, but that can be a mistake. Clearing security does not mean you are close to your gate. At many airports, your gate may be much farther away than you expect. It could be in another terminal, down a long corridor, or in an area that requires a shuttle, a train, or a long walk just to reach it. And until you actually go there, you do not really know how much time you have. That is where people get caught off guard, They stop for food, sit down near the first open seats they see, or assume they can check the gate later. But later is exactly when distance becomes a problem. A gate that looked simple on a boarding pass can turn into a 20-minute walk once you are inside the airport. That is why one of the smartest things you can do after clearing security is go directly to your gate first. Find it. See how far it really is. Understand what kind of walk it takes. Only then do you actually know whether you have time to relax, or whether the airport has already taken more of your day than you thought. Number 8. Skipping online check-in and giving yourself more to do at the airport. Another common airport mistake is leaving too much to handle after you arrive. A lot of travelers still wait until they get to the airport to check in, get their boarding pass, or figure out the basics of where they need to go. That may not seem like a major problem, but it adds extra steps at the worst possible time. Most airlines open online check-in about 24 hours before departure, and if you are not checking a bag, that one step can save you a surprising amount of time. It can mean walking past long counter lines instead of standing in them and getting one step closer to security much faster. It also helps you avoid another problem that many travelers forget about: check-in cutoffs. For domestic flights, check-in often closes around 30 to 45 minutes before departure. For international flights, it can be 60 minutes or more. Miss that window, and you may not just be late. You could lose your seat entirely. That is why online check-in matters more than people think. It is not just about convenience. It is about removing unnecessary risk before you even leave for the airport. Number 7. Trusting your phone too much. A lot of travelers now move through the airport with almost everything stored on one device. Their boarding pass is on their phone. Their hotel details are on their phone. Their ride information is on their phone. Their contact with family is on their phone. And as long as that phone is working, everything feels easy. But that is exactly the problem. Phones fail at the worst times. Batteries die. Screens crack. Internet connections drop. Sometimes a scanner simply refuses to read what is right in front of it. And when that happens in a security line or at the gate, the situation gets stressful very fast. That is why relying only on a digital boarding pass can be a mistake. A paper backup may feel old-fashioned, but when your screen goes dark or the scanner will not cooperate, that backup suddenly matters. The same goes for battery life. A traveler who spends hours at the airport using their phone without thinking ahead may not feel the problem until boarding starts, or until they land and need directions, hotel access, or a ride. At that point, low battery is no longer annoying, it becomes a real travel problem. Number 6. Leaving the most important things in the wrong bag. Another mistake travelers still make is assuming that if something is in their carry-on, it is automatically safe. But that is not always true. If a flight is full, a gate agent may ask passengers to check their carry-on at the last minute. And once that happens, anything inside that bag is no longer staying with you in the cabin. That is where this mistake becomes serious. A lot of travelers keep their most important items in the wrong place without thinking much about it. Medications, wallet, travel documents, electronics chargers. All of it may feel secure inside a carry-on suitcase, right up until that suitcase is taken from them at the gate. And if something goes wrong after that, the problem is much bigger than inconvenience. This is especially important with prescription medication. If your bag is delayed, misplaced, or simply unavailable when you need it, replacing that medication may not be easy, especially away from home. That is why the smarter habit is simple. Keep anything essential in your personal item from the start. Because the bag under the seat is the bag that stays with you. Number 5. Losing awareness just because you're in an airport. One mistake that does not get talked about enough is how quickly travelers let their guard down once they step into an airport. There is something about the environment that makes people assume they are automatically in a safer space. But before security after security near pickup zones, and in other public areas, you can still be distracted, exposed, and easier to take advantage of than you realize. And airports are full of distraction. You are looking for signs, checking messages, watching for updates, trying to find your ride, thinking about where to go next. And when your attention gets pulled in 5 directions at once, your phone, wallet, passport, or other valuables can become much easier to target. That is what makes this mistake dangerous. It is not always about doing something obviously careless. Sometimes it is simply being too mentally occupied to notice how vulnerable you look in the moment. A traveler who is tired, rushed, and focused on the next step is not paying attention to the present one. And that is exactly when small lapses in awareness can turn into bigger problems. Number 4. Moving too fast through security and leaving something behind. Security is one of the easiest places in the airport to lose something important. Not because people do not care about their belongings, but because the whole process pushes them to move quickly. You take things out, place them in bins. Watch the line, put your shoes back on, grab your bags, and try not to hold anyone up. The moment it is over, most travelers just want to get out of the area as fast as possible. And that is exactly when things get left behind. Phones, wallets, watches, passports, even laptops. It happens because your mind is already moving on before your body has fully finished the process. That is why this mistake is so common. It does not come from one big failure. It comes from being rushed in a place designed to keep you moving. A very small habit can make a big difference here before you leave the security area. Stop for 1 second and look back. Look at the bin area. Look at the floor. Look at the counter. Because once you walk away without something important, getting it back can become far more stressful than the extra few seconds it would have taken to check. Number 3. Getting into the wrong car because you're tired and ready to leave. One of the most dangerous airport mistakes can happen after the flight when travelers are mentally done and just want the day to be over. That is exactly when people stop checking as carefully as they should. They see a car pull up. The driver says the right name. The moment feels close enough. And because they are tired, distracted, or eager to get moving, they are tempted to treat close enough as good enough. But this is one of those moments where close enough is not enough. If you are using a rideshare, the details need to match. The plate needs to match. The car needs to match. And if something feels off, that is already a reason to stop. What makes this mistake so risky is that it often begins with pressure, not carelessness. You are standing outside, handling bags, thinking about the hotel, the cruise port, the long drive ahead. Your brain wants the next step to be simple. That is why this is the wrong moment to rush. A traveler can recover from a delayed pickup. Recovering from getting into the wrong car is a much more serious matter. Number 2. Packing for the trip, but not for the airport. A lot of travelers pack for where they are going, but not for what the airport itself is going to demand from them first. And that creates problems before the trip has even properly started. A bag that is too heavy, too full, or too awkward to manage may not seem like a big issue when you are packing at home. But inside an airport, that extra weight changes everything. It slows you down. It makes you more tired. It adds stress at check-in, at security, at the gate, and anywhere you have to keep lifting, moving, or reorganizing your things. This is also where travelers get caught by carrying too much in too many pieces. A suitcase, a personal item, a purse, an extra pouch. It all feels manageable until the airport starts forcing you to move quickly and stay organized at the same time. And once your bags stop working with you, they start working against you. That is why smart packing is not just about fitting more into a bag. It is about making the airport easier to move through. Because when your luggage creates stress before boarding, the rest of the travel day usually feels harder too. Number 1. Booking a connection that looks fine on paper but fails in real life. One more mistake travelers keep making is trusting a connection time just because the airline allowed it to be sold. On paper, a short connection can look manageable. The itinerary goes through. The timing seems possible. And people assume that if the airline offers it, it must be realistic. But realistic and possible are not the same thing. A connection under an hour can fall apart very quickly. It takes time just to get off the first plane, especially if you are seated farther back. Then you may have to change terminals, take a tram ride, a shuttle, or walk much farther than expected. And while all of that is happening, boarding for your next flight may already be underway. That is the part many travelers underestimate. It is not just about when your first flight lands. It is about how much usable time you actually have after landing. And in many cases, that window is much smaller than it looks. So a short connection may save time in theory, but in practice it can leave you one delay, one slow exit, or one long terminal transfer away from missing the next flight completely. Most airport problems do not begin with one dramatic mistake. They begin with small ones. A wrong assumption about time, a little too much trust in routine, a missed detail, a rushed decision, a bag packed the wrong way, a moment of inattention when the pressure is already building. And that is why these mistakes matter so much. On their own, each one can seem minor, but together they are often what turns a normal travel day into stress delays, lost items, missed flights, and problems that were completely avoidable. The good news is that most of them are preventable. You do not need to be an expert traveler to avoid them. You just need to move through the airport with a little more awareness, a little more margin, and a little more intention than most people do. Because in 2026, the travelers who protect their trips best are usually not the fastest ones. They are the ones who see the problems coming before the airport turns them into consequences.